14 years after a man vanished in the Texas Hill Country, a hiker stepped off a limestone ridge and found something that made no sense. A tent stood beneath a cedar tree, not collapsed, not shredded, not half buried by time. It was standing upright, its poles locked in place, the fabric sun-bleached but intact. The entrance flap hung partially zipped, as if someone had stepped away only moments earlier and expected to return. Inside, there was a sleeping bag, folded, a rusted camp stove, upright, a canvas backpack, leaned carefully against the tent wall. Nothing had been scattered, nothing had been dragged away by animals. There were no bones, no remains, no sign of a struggle. And yet this campsite was sitting inside an area that had been searched repeatedly, on foot and by air, after a man disappeared in 1981, 14 years earlier. Before we go any further, I want you to hold on to this question, and I'd like you to share your thoughts as the story unfolds. How does an entire campsite remain undiscovered for more than a decade in terrain that was actively searched? Because the answer to that question changes how you see everything that came before and everything that comes after. The man who disappeared was named Daniel Mercer. He was 34 years old. In the spring of 1981, living alone just outside Houston, working as a civil engineering draftsman. His job required precision, patience, and attention to detail, traits that followed him into every part of his life. Daniel wasn't reckless, he wasn't impulsive, he didn't vanish. Friends described him as quiet but reliable, the kind of person who always showed up early and never left things unfinished. But in the months leading up to his disappearance, something about him had changed. He had recently ended a long-term relationship. His father had died unexpectedly the year before, and co-workers later remembered him asking unusual questions about extended time off, remote areas of Texas, and how far outside the city someone could go before there were no roads and no phone service. On May 11th, 1981, Daniel packed his car before sunrise. He told his sister he needed time alone. He told his boss he'd be back in a week. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. His car, a beige 1978 Ford LTD, was loaded with camping gear, food, and supplies for several days. Gas receipts later showed him driving west, away from Houston, deeper into central Texas. He passed established campgrounds. He drove past small towns without stopping. Whatever he was looking for, he wasn't looking for company. The Texas Hill Country doesn't look dangerous from a distance. Rolling hills, scattered cedar, shallow creeks, cutting through limestone. But the land hides its risks well. Sinkholes collapse without warning. Drop-offs disappear behind brush. And entire miles of land have no trails, no signs, and no cell coverage. Daniel never checked into a campground. He never contacted anyone after May 13th. By May 18th, he didn't show up for work. At first, no one panicked. Daniel had taken vacations before. But when he missed several days without calling, concern turned into fear. On May 20th, his sister contacted the local sheriff's office. The next morning, a deputy found Daniel's car. It was parked along a narrow dirt access road, barely visible from the highway. The vehicle wasn't damaged. There were no broken windows, no blood, no indication of a struggle. Inside the car, investigators found Daniel's wallet, still holding cash. A folded road map sat on the passenger seat, several areas circled by hand. The cooler was empty. The sleeping bag was missing. The keys were gone. Search teams arrived within hours. Deputies, volunteers, and search and rescue units combed the area. Dogs picked up Daniel's scent and tracked it for nearly half a mile until it ended abruptly at a dry creek bed. No footprints continued beyond that point. Helicopters flew overhead. The terrain was searched in expanding grids. Limestone outcroppings were checked. Creek beds were walked. Nothing. Theories emerged quickly. Maybe Daniel became disoriented and died of exposure. Maybe he fell into a sinkhole hidden by brush. Maybe he wandered farther than anyone realized. But each explanation came with problems. Daniel had enough supplies. The weather had been mild and the land had been searched thoroughly. After 6 weeks, the official search was suspended. Daniel Mercer was listed as missing. Months later, while cleaning out Daniel's apartment, his sister Lynn found something no one had known existed: a spiral notebook. Most of it was blank, but scattered throughout were short entries, observations, not diary pages. The quiet out there feels different. No planes, no roads, just wind. I think I found the right place. The final entry was dated May 13th, 1981, 2 days after Daniel parked his car. I don't think anyone has been here before. No coordinates, no landmarks, just that sentence. Years passed. Daniel's case went cold, files were boxed, leads dried up. By the early 1990s, only his sister continued calling sheriff's offices, checking unidentified remains, and following rumors that never went anywhere. Then, in October of 1995, a geology graduate student named Evan Harlow stepped off his assigned survey route while mapping limestone formations near the Pedernales River basin. He noticed something out of place: straight lines, canvas, a tent, standing beneath a cedar tree. Inside were objects that shouldn't have survived 14 years of exposure. A camp stove, a water canteen, a backpack, and a sleeping bag folded with intention. There were no bones, no clothing fragments, no sign of violence. Just evidence that someone had stayed there for a while and then left. The campsite shouldn't have existed. The land had been searched, mapped, walked, flown over, and yet it had remained untouched for 14 years, which raises a far more unsettling possibility. Daniel Mercer didn't vanish suddenly. He may have been there long after everyone stopped looking. When authorities were notified about the campsite, they didn't treat it as a historical curiosity. They treated it as a potential crime scene. Deputies arrived first, followed by investigators who had access to the original missing person file from 1981. Many of them hadn't been born when Daniel Mercer disappeared. Others had only known the case as a footnote, a name, on a list of unresolved disappearances that never quite made sense. The campsite sat in a shallow natural depression, partially shielded by cedar and limestone outcroppings. From more than 50 yards away, it blended into the terrain. From the air, it was almost invisible, its colors matching the surrounding rock and scrub. That detail alone began to explain why it hadn't been discovered earlier, but it didn't explain everything. The tent fabric, though brittle in places, hadn't disintegrated. The zipper still worked. The poles were weathered but locked firmly into place. Someone had taken care setting it up. Inside the tent, investigators found no signs of panic, no overturned gear, no torn fabric, no evidence of animals scavenging. The sleeping bag was folded lengthwise, not tossed aside. The backpack contained a few items: spare socks, a pocket knife, a flashlight with dead batteries, and a small paperback book. Warped from moisture, but still legible. The title was a collection of essays on solitude and nature. Near the edge of the campsite, investigators found a fire ring constructed from local stone. Inside were layers of ash, compressed by time, indicating repeated use. Not a single night's fire, but many. This wasn't a place someone stopped briefly. This was a place someone stayed. So before we go any further, take a moment and think about this. And if you're watching along, pause here and tell me what you believe happened? Do you think Daniel Mercer intended to disappear? Or do you think something changed after he arrived? Because investigators were asking themselves the same question. One of the most unsettling discoveries came when the campsite was carefully mapped and compared to the original 1981 search grids. The campsite fell just outside the area where dogs had lost Daniel's scent, less than a quarter mile away, close enough that searchers should have walked past it. But they didn't, and there was a reason. The land surrounding the campsite wasn't flat. It dipped and folded in ways that distorted sound and sight lines. Cedar branches grew low and thick. From most angles, the tent was obscured until you were nearly on top of it. From above, it was invisible. But there was something else. Investigators found faint, nearly erased footpaths leading away from the campsite. Not one, but several, radiating outward like spokes, paths worn down over time. Not the kind made by hikers passing through, the kind made by someone walking the same routes, again and again, which raised another disturbing possibility. Daniel Mercer may not have been lost. He may have been living there. So how long did he stay? That question led investigators back to Daniel's notebook. For the first time in years, it was re-examined with the campsite in mind. The fragmented entries suddenly took on a different meaning. The quiet out there feels different. I think I found the right place. No roads, no noise. Daniel hadn't written like someone afraid. He wrote like someone relieved. So why did he leave the campsite? Or more accurately, why didn't he come back? No remains were found within a mile radius of the site. Sinkholes were checked. Creek beds were excavated. Nothing. But there was one detail that unsettled even veteran investigators. The camp stove had been used long after 1981. Carbon analysis of residue suggested fires had been burned for several years beyond Daniel's disappearance, possibly into the mid to late 1980s, which meant one of two things was true. Either Daniel Mercer survived far longer than anyone realized, or someone else had been using his campsite. And that second possibility opened the door to something far darker. Local residents were interviewed again. People who had lived in the area for decades. At first, no one remembered anything unusual. Then slowly, stories began to surface. A rancher recalled seeing smoke in the distance during dry seasons, too consistent to be a wildfire. A hiker remembered hearing movement at night, footsteps that stopped when he stopped. Another local spoke of finding old footprints in creek beds that seemed to appear and disappear overnight. None of these accounts were reported at the time. They didn't seem important then. They did now. The campsite wasn't abandoned suddenly. It had been dismantled carefully. Items weren't taken in a rush. They were selected. Essentials gone, non-essentials left behind, which suggests Daniel, or whoever was there, left deliberately. And here's where the story becomes truly unsettling. There were no signs of a struggle anywhere near the campsite. No blood, no torn clothing, no disturbed earth. Whatever happened to Daniel Mercer didn't happen there, and it didn't happen violently, which leaves us with one final uncomfortable question. If Daniel didn't die there, and he didn't leave in a hurry, then why did he never come back? When investigators widened the search beyond the campsite, they weren't looking for a body anymore. They were looking for movement. Because the evidence suggested that whatever happened to Daniel Mercer didn't occur in a single moment. It unfolded over time. The faint footpaths radiating outward from the campsite were followed carefully. Most of them faded into hard limestone after a few dozen yards, but one path stood out. It angled southwest toward a series of shallow ravines that eventually fed into a seasonal creek. Along that route, investigators began to find small, easily overlooked details. The kind no one would notice unless they already knew something was wrong. A flattened patch of grass where someone had rested. A stone placed deliberately atop another stone, not naturally fallen. And farther along, a length of nylon cord snagged on cedar bark. It had been cut cleanly at one end. The cord matched the type commonly used in camping gear in the early 1980s. It didn't belong to anyone who had been in the area recently. As the search expanded, another discovery surfaced, one that had been documented years earlier and then forgotten. In 1986, 5 years after Daniel Mercer vanished, a county road crew repairing erosion damage along a rural highway reported finding a boot. It was old, weathered, partially buried by sediment washed down from higher ground. At the time, it was logged as debris. No one connected it to a missing person. Now, nearly a decade later, the boot was pulled from storage. It was a men's hiking boot, size 11. Daniel wore a size 11. The sole pattern matched the brand listed on a receipt found in Daniel's apartment. Camping gear he'd purchased just days before leaving Houston. But there was no second boot, and no remains nearby, which suggested the boot hadn't come off accidentally. Someone had taken it off. Or Daniel had. This discovery shifted the tone of the investigation. If Daniel had lived at the campsite for years, he hadn't done so entirely unseen. He had moved through the land, left traces, possibly encountered other people. Investigators began re-interviewing locals with one specific question in mind. Had anyone seen someone living off-grid in the hill country during the 1980s? At first, the answers were hesitant, vague. Then one stood out, an elderly man who had lived near the area his entire life, recalled something he'd never reported because it didn't feel like his business. In the late 1980s, he said, he used to see a man walking along the creek early in the mornings, always alone, always quiet, carrying a pack. The man avoided eye contact and he never spoke. The witness assumed he was a drifter or someone passing through, but what struck him even years later was this: the man always walked barefoot, even in winter. Investigators pressed for details. The witness described him as thin, bearded, sun-darkened, and cautious. Not sickly, not frantic, just distant. When shown a photograph of Daniel Mercer taken a year before his disappearance, the man stared at it for a long time. Then he said, "That could be him. Not definitely, but close enough to unsettle everyone in the room." If the sighting was accurate, Daniel Mercer was alive at least 7 years after he vanished. Which begged another question. Why didn't he leave? Why didn't he contact his sister? Why didn't he re-enter society? Why did he stay hidden? The answer may lie in something else found near the campsite. Several hundred yards downhill, investigators uncovered a shallow limestone overhang. Beneath it was evidence of another fire pit, smaller, more concealed, and beside it, etched faintly into the rock, were markings. Not symbols, words, weathered, incomplete, but legible enough to understand. Quiet is safe. Don't go back. And one final line, written smaller, as if added later: they notice you. No one could confirm who wrote them, but they hadn't been there in 1981, which means someone was still thinking those thoughts years later. The theory that followed was controversial. Some investigators believe Daniel had chosen isolation deliberately, not as an escape, but as a refuge. That something in his former life had pushed him away from people entirely. Others believed something else, that Daniel had encountered someone or something in the hill country that convinced him it was safer to stay hidden than to return. There was no evidence of a cult, no confirmed criminal activity, no reports of violence, just a man who vanished, a campsite that stayed hidden, and signs that someone lived quietly, carefully, and fearfully for years, and then, at some point, left. The final clue came from Daniel's bank records. In 1989, 8 years after his disappearance, a dormant account registered a failed access attempt. Someone had tried to withdraw money using Daniel's information. They failed, and they never tried again. That attempt occurred less than 30 miles from the campsite. After that, nothing. No sightings, no transactions, no traces. Daniel Mercer disappeared twice, once in 1981 and again sometime in the years that followed. And the land where he lived quietly for so long still hasn't given up its answers. So I'll leave you with this final question, and I want you to think about it carefully. Did Daniel Mercer choose to disappear? Or did he learn something out there that convinced him he had no other choice? Because sometimes the most unsettling mysteries aren't about how someone died. They're about why they stayed alive and never came back.